Alright, the last part of chapter 18 is the biogeochemical cycles. The standard that we're looking at is to describe the major events which occur during the major biogeochemical cycles. So what are the major biogeochemical cycles? That's a mouthful, isn't it? Here's the definition of what a biogeochemical cycle is. And you can kind of derive this from the actual word. Bio meaning living, geo meaning the earth, and then chemicals, you know what chemicals are. So it's the circulation of these chemicals, the substances, through the living organisms from or to the environment, and that's the geo part. So the four main cycles are nicely illustrated all together in this diagram. But they're the water cycle, which you should be very familiar with. If you're not, you need to look in your book and perhaps look at some of the YouTube videos I put up on the water cycle. The carbon cycle, again, you should be fairly familiar with this one as well. If you're not, please make an effort to look this up in your book. Again, this is chapter 18. The nitrogen cycle we will go over because I know this is, or it was new for you earlier in the year, and the phosphorus cycle as well. There's not a whole lot you need to know about the phosphorus cycle, so we're not going to spend a long time on that. So let's start with the nitrogen cycle. Why is nitrogen important? And now that we have studied DNA, and you know that these nitrogen bases, look at all the ends here, look at that. We would not be able to create new cells with complete copies of our DNA if we didn't have any nitrogen. Now, this is not a trick question, but what kinds of organisms have DNA? Hopefully you've said all of them. So nitrogen is important for plants. It's important for every living organism because all living organisms have some form of DNA and RNA, and those incorporate large amounts of nitrogen. So there we go. Nitrogen is very important. So, the nitrogen cycle. How does the nitrogen get from the atmosphere, which is 78% nitrogen, into you and me? Well, first of all, we get it from eating plants. So, how do plants get nitrogen? Because I'll tell you what, nobody can use the nitrogen in the atmosphere. It must be converted into a form that living organisms can use. Plants get nitrogen from nitrogen fixation. That's a process, and it's the process by which bacteria in the soil and on plant roots take in that atmospheric nitrogen and turn it into nitrates. Now, you'll talk more about nitrates and nitrites and things like that in chemistry. And you don't have to memorize that nitrates have oxygen in them, but if you look at the chemical composition, N2 is the atmospheric nitrogen, and the bacteria, through nitrogen fixation, fix it into a form that plants can use. And they do that by adding oxygen. Now, these nitrates, it's no longer a gas, it's now a solid, it's now an actual particle that the plants can take in. And we get nitrogen, being consumers, by eating the plants. Now, if you're strictly a carnivore, like a lion or a tiger, you get your nitrogen by eating other things that ate plants. So, really, plants are vitally important to our existence, not only for that carbon cycle, getting the carbohydrates that we need to make ATP, but also in getting nitrogen in order to replicate our DNA. Alright, so heterotrophs, that would be me and you, we've consumed the plants, or the animals that eat plants. Now what? What happens to the nitrogen now? How does it get back into the soil? How does it get back into the environment? And some of you are thinking it, but no, we don't exhale it like we do carbon dioxide. So how does it get back in the soil? Well, it's pretty simple. When an organism dies and it decomposes, the nitrogen that was in the cells actually returns to the soil, or, and this is the fun part, when the organism defecates. That's a fancy word for poop. So when a deer poops in the woods, it's actually returning nitrogen back to the soil. Have you ever wondered why poop makes such good fertilizer? This is the reason. Because the plants need nitrogen. So you can use a man-made fertilizer that puts nitrogen and phosphorus and some other things together, or you can use poop because it's high in nitrogen. Fun, huh? So, can plants use this nitrogen from the poop or the organism decomposing? Nope. We've got to go through a few more steps. But at least it's there. So, decomposers must break down the nitrogen that's in the organism or in the organism's poop. You guys, if you have a dog and it poops in the backyard, you know in the summertime there are tons of flies around that poop. The flies are the decomposers that are helping break down that nitrogen from ammonia, and here's the chemical formula in case you're interested, into ammonium. So we're going from NH3 to NH4+. And this little plus means that it has a positive charge. This process, going from NH3 to NH4+, is called ammonification. So we're making ammonium from ammonia. So very little difference in the chemical composition and little difference in the name. However, there's a big difference for plants. So ammonification. I don't know that you're going to have to know this for the EOC. I know you're going to need to know the idea of nitrogen fixation. That's going to be a huge one. So if you're going to spend some time on the nitrogen cycle, make sure you understand nitrogen fixation. This is sort of secondary. All right. So plants can't use ammonium either. It must be turned back into those nitrates and nitrites that were created during nitrogen fixation. So the process that happens when the nitrogen is ammonium is called nitrification. Again, this isn't important. Please focus on nitrogen fixation, and I'll review that in a moment. So, can the plants use nitrates? Yes. So, how does NO2 get back into the atmosphere? Because if the bacteria are performing nitrogen fixation and pulling atmospheric nitrogen out of the air and turning it into nitrates that plants can use, then how does it get replenished? How does it get back into the atmosphere? And the answer to that is denitrification, when anaerobic bacteria break down nitrates. Now, you should know what this anaerobic bacteria means now. It means that as they create energy, they do not use oxygen. And that's all. So let's go back and take a look at nitrogen fixation, and here it is. So we have atmospheric nitrogen into, and it enters the soil, and nitrogen fixing bacteria that live on the roots of bean plants can convert the N2 into nitrates that the plant uses. It's also these bacteria also live in the soil, so nitrogen fixing soil bacteria, they create ammonium, and there are other bacteria that do the nitrification, so here is all of this stuff. But this is the most important one, nitrogen fixing bacteria living in the soil. The phosphorus cycle, why is it important? Phosphorus is an important mineral in bones, teeth, and DNA. If you remember back to our DNA molecule, the sugar backbone is linked together through phosphates. So we know we get our phosphates from plants, but where do plants get it? and they take it up from the soil. Now, phosphate really comes from rocks, and through erosion, and water can dissolve bits of phosphates as well, and that's how it gets into plants. And that's pretty much all you need to know about the phosphorus cycle, that it comes from rocks, and that it gets into the soil by being dissolved by water or through erosion. And plants take it up through their roots, just like they do water. So here's a basic cycle. So here's the rock down here. It gets weathered or dissolved. The phosphates end up in the soil. They're taken up through the plant roots. The animals eat it. Okay. The animals poop and pee. Phosphates get back in the soil. And the animals are also decomposed by fungus and bacteria. So there it is. And that's it.